All right, Faith family, thank you for tuning in to this week's podcast. We're excited to have you listening. This is going to be a really exciting podcast because we have our next gen pastor, Tyler Womble, with us. We're going to talk about some really cool things today. So I'm super excited about that, Tyler. So thank you, first of all, for being here. Tell us a little bit about you and your family, man.
Yeah, man. Love Apex Baptist. Grew up in the area. And so, man, both this space and this church, super near and dear to my heart. Amy is definitely the better half.
Amen.
All of you know that already, but she's great. Really enjoy getting to work alongside of her, and then like our family, just good stuff. And then got an almost 2-year-old, which is insane, dude.
Crazy.
It is crazy going from like keep them alive to like they like tell you what they want now. It's wild. I'm not used to it yet.
That's amazing. And Aubrey's great, man. She's telling you what she wants. I imagine she's telling you what to do too as well, 100%. Right?
100%. And a new development is we get in the car and she'll be like, Dad, church?
Oh.
And which I guess is a good thing. I'm hoping it is. The last time we weren't headed to church and she was a little upset. And I was like, man, I guess she thinks she runs the place.
That's what she does. And she's a pastor's kid. So this is going to be like a second home to her, first home many days. So that's awesome, man. We love you and your family. Amy is the better half, but we like you too. So we're glad that you're here.
So real.
So tell us a little bit about, you've been at this church for a while. Tell us a little bit about your journey from whatever position that was you started as before me to now becoming our next gen pastor. Tell us about that.
Yeah, man. So I would say as a student in our youth group, man, like you could label me like a church rat. Like I was up here all the time, whether I was wanted to or not. I lived in biking distance, so we were right across the street, kind of near Apex Middle. And so I was just up here all the time. And that led to, love for the Lord, called to ministry, all the things. So I went to Appalachian State. At that time, Pastor Phil had retired and Pastor John Mark had stepped in and been called here. And so I got back and I kind of knew him, but not obviously personally. And so, man, I just said, hey, I'm starting at the seminary, wanting to do counseling, and definitely don't want to like just learn all the theory and not practice it. Yeah. And so it started as like, man, is there any way I can just volunteer here at Apex while I'm here? Me and Amy were dating long distance. We knew like wanted to get married and have her move up here. And so at the time, I didn't know this, but the guy who was doing flight, so that's preteen ministry and college, was actually getting interviewed to be our new student pastor after Chuck, who also had been here, my youth pastor for 25 years, had retired as well. And so in the midst of all of those things, he's like, hey, we got something for you to do, like 5th and 6th grade in college. And I was like, okay, like that's an interesting tandem. I was surprised to learn 5th and 6th graders are a lot more like college students.
Oh, that's awesome.
Realized they both think they have it all figured out and like need a lot of help.
A true story.
So that made for a fun Sunday morning, going from leading one of those to the other. Anyway, long story short, did that. Helped at our friendship campus doing Next Gen. Then that led to when we brought that back, I was still doing some like older elementary and middle school, kind of bridging the gap of kids and students. Then student ministry, and then still student ministry, but get to do some oversight of the whole team from birth to college. And man, like what a gift. Like I love our team. They are so sharp and it's so fun. Just I really see my role, at least on that side of things, as just like getting stuff out of the road for them so that they can hit the gas hard, drive 70 when it comes to living sent, reaching the next generation, but also equipping the next generation to reach it as well.
It's awesome, man. Well, your team respects you, and Apex is an amazing church. I feel very blessed to be here, but our church is better because you're here too, man. So thank you so much for the many years in different positions, different roles that you've invested here. And even as a kid, I'm sure got in trouble because my understanding is kind of all the crevices of the church, right?
Yeah. Do you want to hear a story?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay.
Go for it.
One of the times I got in trouble was, the Christmas parade that happens every year here. I got a call from Chuck one time, and he's like, "Hey, I need you to come down from there." And the reason he gave me that call is back before the remodel, you could use the handrail of the stairs on the back. There was some outside stairs, and you could use them to get on the roof. And so I decided to watch Christmas parade from there.
That seems like a great spot.
And someone told on me. It wasn't Chuck, but anyway. So yeah, I've definitely.
That's awesome.
done some of that. I've taken some Jeep Wrangler doors and had them on the top of the roof of the gym. And yeah, which is hilarious because now that like petrifies me for like anything like that to happen as student.
Oh, for sure. It's coming back around, man. Oh, yeah. Here's the real question. Did they throw candy back then at parades? I know they used to.
Yeah.
So did you ever try to get them
I was in a float and my like, I'm a lefty, a little movement on the fastball. Like my goal was like peg somebody with those Smarties because it's cold too. So
yeah. That's awesome. Yeah, it's definitely coming back to get you now as a youth pastor. That's great, dude. Well, hey, a couple important questions before we dive into our subject, and I'm really excited about the subject we're going to talk about today, and it's surrounding spiritual fatherhood. So we'll talk about that in just a second. But before we do, a few important questions. Number one, Tyler, I think I know this about you. You enjoy watching movies, right? You're a movie guy. So do you have a like an all-time favorite? What's your favorite movie?
Yeah, I'll go two. So Remember the Titans, a classic.
Good.
I feel like I can quote several of the little like lines there. You talk about the team? What team? I love that line. Me and my buddy Evan at App could probably quote half the movie. So I'd go that one, and then Christopher Nolan's got one called The Prestige that's got a really good like kind of cliffhanger like turn that you're not expecting.
Okay.
So if you haven't watched that one, pretty good, pretty clean, I think. And just check it out.
I'm actually not familiar with that one, so I'll check that one out. That's awesome, man. All right, what about food? Do you have a favorite food?
Oh man, homemade ice cream made. The Treva Wombles recipe out of the New Elam Christian Church.
Okay.
So just like that. I would say I make it not quite as good. My dad makes it better.
What's the secret sauce of that? Can you reveal?
Were eggs in it? I know that's like not allowed because
Well, pasteurized eggs, right? It's okay.
Yeah, I think. I don't know.
There's no salmonella in pasteurized eggs, allegedly.
So homemade ice cream, and then I'm a steak and potatoes kind of guy. So give me a sirloin cooked medium with some like mashed potatoes or a loaded baked potato, and I'm happy. And green beans. My hottest take is that green beans could honestly be a dessert.
Okay, that's a hot take. Yeah, I don't know. I like green beans. I don't know if I can get there.
Not that much.
I thought for sure you'd say Bojangles is your favorite food.
Man.
I don't know why.
Yeah.
That's awesome. All right, so I ask a few different guests. We have some coffee snobs on our staff. Did you know that?
Yes,
they're like super into it. So are you a coffee person?
No, I don't do coffee. I actually didn't really do anything like hot drink. I was just a soda and sweet tea guy until my first mission trip to India.
Okay.
And then just anytime you went in a house, you got a chai.
Okay.
And it was so good. And so actually I came back and I started doing chai lattes. So that's my go-to at Mission Market or Common Ground.
What about tea? Like, are you a tea drinker?
I mean, sure, but like it's just your classic sweet iced tea.
Yes. Yeah. See that, Tyler, listen, we're kindred spirits. I asked a question. I don't remember who it was. Like, do you like coffee or tea? And they're like, I kind of answered whatever. And I was like, listen, when I think about tea, I'm thinking about like a sweet tea from a barbecue joint. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like I would prefer that all. They're like, nah, when you ask coffee or tea, that's not an equation. I guess it has to be like, anyway, I don't know, green tea, chai tea.
I guess, man. The first time I had unsweet tea was actually in New York State. It was in Orlando, Florida. We were down there on a church. I think it was Student Leadership University. And they were serving us food. And I just assumed if I got tea, it was sweet. And just where we were in Orlando, I don't know what the deal was, but I took that sip and I was like,
that's brutal.
What? This is like loud to see it.
Like something's wrong. Yeah. That's not the part of Florida I'm from, just so you know, man. We don't have unsweet tea where I'm from.
As you go south, it gets north. Is that?
That's right. Okay. The further north you go, the further south you get. Anyway, awesome, dude. Well, hey, so good to have you on here. I've looked forward to this podcast, and man, what I want to do is I want to kind of revisit a devotional that you brought to our men, one of our men's gatherings. You talked about spiritual fatherhood, and as our next gen pastor who deals a lot with our families, like a lot of people don't realize this, a big part of what you do is making sure that the parents are equipped. The parents need to be equipped as the primary disciple makers. They need to know how to lead their families well. And in this talk that you gave, I mean, you addressed that, but you also addressed, hey, what about the families that don't have a parent who is doing the work of a disciple maker? And so you talked a lot about spiritual fatherhood and why that's important. So I want to start by asking you this. What is spiritual fatherhood? Just scripturally speaking, like if you're to say, hey, here's how I define it, like what is spiritual fatherhood?
Yeah, that's good. Just to start, I think we talk a lot about mentorship, parenting, discipleship in the home, and I would say spiritual fatherhood is kind of the Venn diagram, like where all those things kind of come together in the middle. And so I would say it is recognizing where the gospel has come to us from, and recognizing we're a part of taking it from there to this next generation. Yeah. And so a little bit of shepherding, man, a little bit of like, what does it mean to step into like spiritual adulthood? And what does it look like to follow Jesus well? I think Paul probably gives us the best example of that. And that's a guy that didn't have biological children, right, but we would say, man, father of the early church. And so this is from 2 Corinthians chapter 12, but I love this. This is verse 14 and 15. It says, "Look, I am ready to come to you this third time. I will not burden you, since I am not seeking what is yours, but you. For children ought not to save up for their parents, but parents for their children." Verse 15 says, "I will most gladly spend and be spent for you. If I love you more, am I to be loved less?" And so, like, man, I see it as us spending that equity to reach and to be for and to really invest in that next generation, both in the local church, but then also, God's family around the world.
That's awesome, man. Yeah, and I think you see it all over Scripture. And Paul is a perfect example. And I love how you said that of him, not biologically having any children, but look at the impact he made on so many. And
Absolutely.
You see Paul and Timothy's relationship and the Corinthians text that you read, just powerful. And even like Peter to Mark, right? Like Peter calls Mark my son. And you have to like understand this is what this means, right? It's this spiritual fatherhood. And you think of Old Testament, you have Elijah and Elisha, and you see this example over and over again. So obviously it is important. And I think you scratched the surface on this, but why is it important for us today?
Yeah, man, I think it matters so much. One, just as our student pastor, something that we noticed, and it completely changed a lot of our ministry philosophy. A lot of our life groups were happening on Sunday, and while that was great, our large group time where we had worship and they'd come and sit was Wednesday, and we recognized so many students who don't know Jesus, whose parents are not involved in church, were coming on Wednesday. They weren't coming on Sunday, but they were coming on Wednesday. And me and Callie kind of sat back after one Wednesday, and we looked at it, and we're like, man, so many of them came, heard a great message, sat through it, saw worship, and then left and didn't experience that relationship with another adult that cared for them, and then went on their merry way. And we were like, what, we might be missing that opportunity, not just for what they've heard, but then to connect them to that body, to that family that the Lord talks about so often. I think about 1 John, where it's like, older men speak to younger men, older women, would you teach younger? Like, that's the whole goal of this. And so what I love about, the concept of spiritual fatherhood or motherhood is it's not just, okay, like I need to be looking out for those preschoolers and keeping them safe. Obviously, that's 100% a piece of it. Yes. But it's adult to student, it's older adult to younger adult, and everywhere in between, to where I think about the phrase like being an owner rather than not a renter. Like a renter's like, yeah, that's like my church family, but like we're like extended family. Like I go to your wedding when I get invited, and I might like comment on your Facebook like profile picture, but like we're not family. And I think this concept of spiritual fatherhood is like, no, there's an investment. Like I'm spending my life not just for nothing, but spending it in an investment in the future of the family. Yeah, man. Oh, I love that. I love that so much. And one of the things that I think about is the importance of making sure that we are being intentional in this area, because you think about this, you gave a great example of kids that come in, hear a great sermon, they go home. How many, Tyler, I'm sure this is anecdotal, but how many students would you say are going throughout the rest of their week like hungry for someone to ask them a question of like, man, so Pastor Tyler just talked about how to deal with temptation this past Sunday or past Wednesday night at midweek. How are you doing with that? Like what are some struggles that because my thought is we probably have droves of students, it's true of adults as well, who like they're ready for someone to ask them how they're doing, but they don't have that. To your point earlier, there is this reality where they're going to go home and they're not going to get that question. But they want somebody to ask them. They want to talk with somebody through that. They want somebody to ask them those questions. What's been your experience in that area? Like, do you think that to be true? Oh, 100%. And something that I think is even interesting generationally is you think about the access that they have to the answer. they've got more access than I had, than you had, than anybody has had. Because you've got AI, you've got the internet, you've got just droves and droves of, hey, I want to know the answer to this. What they don't have is an authentic relationship with someone who's real, who's not perfect, who's trying to figure this out, but just an authentic human that they can go, hey, how does this play out in real life with like real skin and blood and tears, and like, how do I actually follow Jesus in this moment? They've got plenty of things that tell them the right answer. They got plenty of TikTok videos and Instagram reels and pretty little statements about how it should work. What they don't know is how to actually live it out. I think about it like this. I think my generation really wanted to like kind of prove like, hey, like we're ready for this. Like we can do this. And I see kind of the tail end of my generation, because I feel this way some, but especially Gen Z going, man, I almost want that apprentice model that we saw so prevalent, a couple hundred years ago. I think about like American Revolution. They've got the YouTube video to learn it. What they don't have is that person to go do it with. And so, man, that's like we've shifted our whole Wednesday to where, man, all of our students have 2 to 3 of those adults outside of their family saying, hey, this is what it looks like, echoing hopefully what the primary discipleships that's happening in the home, but hearing it from a totally different way. And the last thing I'd say about all this too is because we're raising up the church now, and there are massive gaps when it comes to students feeling equipped and ready to step onto the mission field, to becoming a pastor, to serving locally. And I think some of that has to do with, are we creating resilient disciples? We might get into this later, but Barna did a study, and they were like, okay, what are the correlations between a resilient disciple, meaning someone that sticks with church and following Jesus after youth group? And the 2 things they saw were, one, 80% of them had an adult outside of their parents they felt like they had a relationship with at church. 80% of them.
Wow.
Versus the ones that didn't have that, and they're more like spiritual nomads, or kind of like dip your toe in the water kind of people. And then the second one was having an opportunity to serve and actually feel like you were the church now. So I think what better way as spiritual fathers, I think about like learning how to change the oil with my dad, or like how to use the riding lawnmower without cutting off your toes. Like those are the things that as fathers we get to be that third relationship other than the parents, but then also like doing some of those practices together, having someone that I can go like, hey, am I doing this right? And also someone that knows the warning signs to look out for, because when we're in that spiritual adolescent stage, we don't know the pitfalls, and the enemy loves to take that little gap in the armor and just like wrench it wide open. So as spiritual fathers, we get to stand in the gap for the next generation.
I love that, man. And without a doubt, there's pockets where this is done really well, right? And I think our Next Gen ministry is a great example of that, both on the service side and the actual, hey, let's put flesh and blood to this, and let's help in the area of discipleship by saying, how are you doing? This should be in that spiritual father. But I think you would agree, and it's not common, right? Even though there's pockets where it's done really well, and we've seen this, this exhibited in great ways, and we'd say it's an excellent model. For the most part, it's like across the board, capital C church, it's just not done that well. And so I believe there's some barriers to that. I think that it's often neglected, but it's neglected because ... What are some of the reasons you think it is neglected? Yeah,
I think a little bit of it is even our lack of confidence that we can do it in the first place. We forget that like this is how God has created the biological family, but also the church family. And so I think in a world of specialization, where if I want my kid to be good at this, I go to the expert. We have taken something like becoming that father and gone, well, I'm not equipped, I'm not ready, I got sin in my life, I'm broken, and I how can I compete with AI? Like there's a perfect answer to this, and I don't have it. That's not my life. And what a student's wanting though is exactly that, the imperfect. You're going to need to apologize to them. It's not going to be perfect, but just authentic. I'm trying to follow Jesus as best I can. Let's figure that out together. So I would say the first one is just the enemy speaking the lie that that's not our call and that's not our job, or that we're not equipped in it. When the very fact that we're not equipped shows that we are equipped. So I'd say that, number one, and then two, just prioritizing it. I think that's a lot when it comes to our walk with Jesus
Yeah.
is we got a lot of roles, man. There's a lot of people who want a lot of things for us. And this isn't one that like screams out as like vital and important. But I think because it's kind of been on the back burner, we are out now just starting to see some of the ramifications of, are there spiritual fathers and mothers who are passing this down? Because stuff's getting passed down regardless. I think about in our culture, it's just a matter of what that is and who is doing the passing down of that thing. Is it spiritual things? Is it the church? Is it our culture? Is it school? Is it government? Because that osmosis is constantly happening.
Yeah, that's really good, man. And I think as we process the reality of we are learning something from someone, be it IA, right? Is that right? Artificial intelligence. AI. Sorry. Yes. So anyway, AI. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Whether it's that or whether it's like something on television or at school or like, you're going to get past information. Some of the information could be good. Some of the information could be leading you like away from your walk with Jesus. The question becomes, okay, so if we are to live out what Titus says we should live out, right? You talk about like older men who are mature in the faith, teaching younger men, older women who are mature in the faith, teaching younger women. If we're to live this out, man, what we're doing is we're taking that call seriously of saying, hey, we don't want you to be discipled by everything around us. If we say we believe what we believe, we want to be really intentional in saying, hey, let's go beyond AI. Let's go beyond, I'm going to get that right. Let's go beyond, what we're just kind of throwing you out to with what the world has to offer. Yeah. There's no telling what you're going to get. We're going to go beyond that. We're going to say, this is what we know to be true. We're going to be very proactive, very intentional. We're going to say, hey, let's sit down and let's talk through these things, because I'm a real life person who has real life struggles, but here's what the Lord has shown me. Here's what the Lord is teaching me currently now. That goes so far with people. And I would say, man, you made a reference to a Barna study on, I think it was like you said 80+% of people who were resilient in their discipleship, they were that way. One of the reasons being they were attached to someone outside of their immediate family that poured into them. Why is that important?
Yeah, I think students can sometimes go, oh, like you're my parents. That's my story, Zeb, is like, man, I got godly parents who, not perfect, but like so thankful for their influence in my life. But there were things that they said that I was like, yeah, okay.
Sure.
All right, whatever. Sure. Like, that's fine. And it was guys like Matthew Bradham, Scott Marley, who led my small group one year in student ministry. I think about like Tom Hathaway. Like, they were guys who said the same things as my parents, but I heard them in a different way. And it meant more because, as a kid, I understand it now differently as a parent, where it's not a have to, like, you're choosing it every day to love this incredible gift to you. But I think as students and kids, sometimes we connect differently and we go, oh, like, you don't have to be here, or like, oh, there's something new and something fresh, or wow, they said that and my parents said the same thing. Like, maybe they do know what they're talking about. And then they turn 19 and they realize the parent knew what they were talking about. Yeah. But so often, like, I think when it comes to like why it's helpful to have that third party is it also points to just the family of God and what the beautiful picture that God has put together of this imperfect body with Christ as the head, going, hey, like, we're called to do this together. I think about, I can't remember if it's Moses or Abraham, but it talked about, hey, when we point the next generation to this stuff, like, we want to, bind it on their wrists, write it on the doors. Yeah. But he talked about, we want that to be a village thing, like a group thing. And that's why when we do family commissioning, it's not just, hey, you guys got it, and they're the only ones doing the I-dos. We then turn to the church and we say, hey, like, they might be in your kindergarten class. You might see them at date night. You might have them on your T-ball team with your kid, and they are your responsibility too, which again is hard because we're like, man, we got this responsibility and that one, and man, I barely feel like I can accomplish the responsibilities I have with my own kid. But I think there's something special about Jesus going, no, like, that's the point. Like, we're supposed to do this together, and when there's gaps and when we're walking through hard things, like my parents had a lot going on when I was a teenager, and that doesn't mean that they failed me. In fact, I saw some beautiful pursuits of God during hard seasons. But in the midst of that, God also was so good in providing me with some additional spiritual fathers and mothers that, like, Tyler Womble would not be who Tyler Womble is without those folks.
Absolutely.
And they didn't have their stuff together all the time. But it wasn't the ones with the perfect answers that I felt were my fathers.
Yeah.
It was the ones that would say, hey, I'm running this errand, like hop in the car with me. And hey, let me teach you how to do like homeless ministry at Moore Square on a Friday. And like, hey, how's stuff like really going, and asking that extra question. So I think that's why it matters to have that person alongside of the parent, because just like Ecclesiastes, like when one falls down, the other can pick them up. And I don't know about you, but like, man, every day I'm like, I need some help getting picked up. From,
Absolutely.
like, figuring out how to like be a good, because I want to give Aubrey the world.
Yeah.
But like, I don't have the world in my hands. The Lord does.
Yeah.
And who has he handed that to? It's his imperfect, but good church that he's handed the keys to.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. And, I just a testimony here. I think about the idea of someone outside of your immediate family that pours into you and how special that can be. And I immediately go back in my own brain to like, okay, let's think through my life. Is there someone who really poured into me? And I don't have to go very far in my brain to think of a man named Mr. Robin, because my dad and I, we were saved pretty much the same time, within a year of one another. And so did I have a father that poured into me spiritually? I mean, the answer is no, right? Like, I was getting ready to graduate high school when my dad came to faith. And so, just trying to figure out, okay, what's this mean? What does it mean to walk with Jesus? And there was this man, Robin, who was a part of my dad's church that he was going to, and they eventually became a part of a church plant out in one of the poor areas where they were from. And so we worked really closely with that small team that was putting that together. And Mr. Robin was one of those guys, one of the elders in that church. And he gave me a job one summer. I'd worked, kind of on the farm my whole life, and I was now getting a little older and wanted to make a little more money. And so whatever pockets of time I had, he ran a construction company. And he said, I tell you what, you can come work with me anytime you can. And so I would find time, whether it was on a Saturday, whether it was on an afternoon that I had free, or a rainy day where there was some indoor construction work. Mr. Robin would take me, and we did all kinds of stuff, man, like a bunch of crazy jobs. We would put down concrete curbs. We would work in HUD housing remodels. We did lots of different things. I learned a lot, anything from concrete to drywall, like framing. I learned lots of things from Mr. Robin, godly man pursuing Jesus. And I remember him saying to me one day, and I was a teenager. And I remember him saying this to me. He said, do you know why I like you working with me in construction? And I was like, well, why is that, Mr. Robin? He said, well, I think you're a good worker. And I was like, I appreciate that. He said, but what I really like about you is you don't know what you're doing. And that means you're going to ask me how to do it, and you're going to do it my way. And I was like, okay. I was like, well, I appreciate that, man. I was like, I think that's a compliment, but I'm not 100% sure. He said, but here's the deal, man. He said, as we follow Jesus, that's exactly how we need to understand that our way is not the right way. And he has a way that is the right way. And we have to be willing, and this comes with humility and an understanding of your own weaknesses. We have to be willing to listen to him and follow his way for you, because it's the best way. He said, I believe my way is the best way for you to work this construction job. He's like, but I'm imperfect. Jesus' way is the best way. And you have to take that same mindset of, Lord, show me the way, teach me. Well, guess what? We learned that in the Word. We learned that in corporate worship. That we would be silly to think that's not a part of discipleship, but you cannot get far in the scripture without seeing, man, this really happens in relationships. Like, you need to have that spiritual father in your life that's going to help you to understand what that looks like for you. So yeah, man, just by way of testimony, I love to hear what you're saying, because I think if we can encourage our folks to see the importance of being that person to someone, being a Paul to a Timothy kind of thing, I think it helps with our growth at large. But here's the question. So if I'm seeking to be a spiritual father, but I don't know where to begin, what kind of advice would you give me? Like, hey, listen to this podcast, been reading the scriptures. I feel like this is something I need to do. Where do I start? What would you say?
So I'll go two ways, informal and formal. Obviously formal, man, jump in and serve with us. I think, someone has said, I might butcher this, but it's essentially they won't care about what you know until they know that you care.
Yeah.
And so what I would not suggest is like just walk up to some random kid on Sunday morning and be like, hey, let me teach you like the 5 solas or any of that. Like, that's not gonna be helpful. They're gonna be like, who in the world are you?
Absolutely.
But I would say there are some incredible ways to jump in and to serve and know those. But I think we all have our little spheres of influence. And going back to the imitating thing, I think the first place we can start is asking this question: if one of our next gen students began to imitate me, what would they do? And so like you're all about some self like introspection a lot of times, something I really appreciate about you. I think it starts with that. If they copied me on Sunday, what would they be copying when they worship, when we turn to the text and like, are they going to be copying notes? Are they going to be checking fantasy football? Are they going to be engaging with others? And so I think that's a great place to start is if they imitated me, what would they do?
It's good.
Because they always are. One of the things I shared at that men's gathering is oftentimes spiritual fatherhood happens more when you think they're not looking. And the reality is we are forming our kids, our preschoolers, our students every Sunday.
Yeah.
The question is like, what are they learning to imitate? The like, hey, they get the bare minimum. Hey, like, yeah, like we're going to put on a show right now. Or is it, man, I'm here because I want to worship a living God who has changed my life. And so start with what are they imitating? I think the second thing is move from a renter to an owner of like, man, if they're here, like those are my kids.
Yeah.
And I think there's, especially for fathers, I think there is this flip side that, man, I get because I'm a student pastor of like, I don't want to be the creepy guy that's like always hanging out with kids and like asking how they're doing. Because that's the last thing I want to do. But, but there is a part of that is saying, hey, like you are my spiritual kids here. And like, let's learn a name. Maybe if you sit at the same spot every Sunday and that family sits near you every time, it's the first month you just learn their name. The second month, like you learn one thing about them. And then that may feel so small, but to that kid, that's another adult that recognizes they're there when they're not there. And that can build into so many more spaces. So asking names, connecting with them, just treating the kids like they're part of your family. You don't have to treat them like your firstborn son, but engaging with them and going, hey, like I care about that. Asking them something that they learned. My first spiritual fathers, I would say, there are plenty, but Clyde Soletta and Terry Bradham were my 5th grade and 6th grade guy leaders when I was in Sunday school here. And I remember when they started, I brought in my notes. We had like a little bulletin, and I had taken notes that Sunday. And they were like, oh, you took notes. Like, tell me something you wrote. And it became this thing where I would go in and I knew they were going to ask me, hey, like, what was a note you took? Back then, Pastor Phil would like have a sentence with just a little space. And so half the time it was just the one word, like fill in the blank. But they would ask me like, hey, what did you learn in worship? And
that's good.
And obviously like we want to learn because we want to learn about the Lord. But part of starting that habit was, hey, they're going to ask me what I learned. And I care about what they think. They've invested in my life. Like I want to do that also for them because they believe in it. So just, I think it's those little things. I think the lie is, well, we have to like meet with them once a week and go on a epic camping trip with them and all. And the Lord uses those things. I think those moments are special. But I really think there's some incredible ways to just connect on a Sunday morning. The key is that consistency in the midst of it.
Yeah, and it's the as you go model, right? So having that intentionality of, hey, whether you're going to a ball game or whether you're walking through the corridor of our church to get to the worship center, what does that conversation look like? You have a moment to say, how's life? How's life really? Like, tell me what's going on in your, how can I pray for you? Those things are important. So if I'm just kind of digesting what you're saying, it's really important to build that relational equity. You don't have the right just to say, hey, I'm your spiritual father and just start speaking into someone's life. You build that relational equity. It's proven over time with your character, your integrity, your influence. You're not perfect, but you do have a pattern of behavior that represents one that is mature in Jesus. And I think that is the important distinction that we must make here is it's not so much an age issue as it is a maturity in Christ issue.
Totally agree.
Some people think just because I have gray hair or no hair that I've earned the right to speak into whoever's life. Well, the truth is, man, you may not be pursuing Jesus, and you don't really have that right, nor do we want you speaking into someone. So I don't mean that to be as harsh as maybe it sounds, but I think it's really important for us to realize that you get to that place whenever you understand that, man, like I simply desire to help someone else as I go. I want to help them to see what it looks like to follow Jesus. Again, imperfect example, but I'm not pointing to me. I'm saying, hey, follow me as I follow Jesus, right? This is exactly what Paul's saying. That wasn't a prideful statement from Paul. That's Paul saying, look, I've seen where the treasure is. Yeah. This is our greatest joy in life. And as you follow me, like I want to point you to him because he's done so much for me. And I may have a little bit on you in terms of experiential knowledge just because I've been walking with Christ longer. So let me help you. Yeah. So yeah, you want to build that relational equity. You want to be really intentional. Hey, let's talk about what's going on in your life. What are some areas that maybe you have questions on? And that accountability of, hey, what'd you learn today? I love the picture of what you catch from people, right? We would say, I mean, we know this as pastors, like, no, you always teach, like you tell, you have to use words. Yeah. And I think, is it, who was the guy that said,
you're talking St. Francis
of Assisi, yes. Yeah. The priest of the gospel. Like he was kind of coined with the one saying, if necessary, use words. He actually didn't say that, I don't believe. But the point of that quote of priest of the gospel at all times, if necessary, use words, is your conduct really does matter. And people do catch from you how you worship and how you follow the Lord. Because here's the reality, man. If your walk doesn't match your talk and you're saying all these things, but in reality, when it comes to like, okay, sitting under the word and you're just kind of like falling asleep, legs kicked up, not paying attention, checking fantasy football, whatever, then, hey, okay, that's what it looks like to follow Jesus. Yeah. That's what that means. So I really can check out here. And then when I get here, I need to be serious. And that's a model that you don't want to set. So we have to be very aware of our own rhythms. And I think that goes back to that self-reflection. Like, man, I need to do some digging in my own heart. What are some patterns that I'm setting that may not be healthy? Yeah. And I think it helps you when you have that responsibility of saying, hey, I have a gospel call to pour into those who are around me. I have a gospel call as an older man in the faith to pour into a younger. Then I really need to pay attention to how I'm living. Yeah. I really need to pay attention to that example that I'm setting.
And half the time too, we're not great at seeing our blind spots, but who also is the best person to ask about those things?
Spiritual father.
Your spiritual father, man. Yes. Like they're gonna see it if you've allowed them into that space. And so like, man, I got a couple of those guys and I'm like, hey, like I need you to tell me, because I know there's stuff and I know I'm not seeing it and the gospel's too worth it and this next generation's too worth it than for me to like sit in my pride and be like, nah, like I'm good. Like I don't need this in my life. And so the reality is we desperately need these spiritual fathers and mothers, like, and it's a detriment to ourselves, but then the next generation when we're not seeking them out. It's another thing. It's extra. It will take time and commitment, but like what a worthy investment. And think about the dividends that we can bank on the return on, because the return on investment's not based on us or the next generation. It's based upon the power of the Holy Spirit. And like, man, like that is not it's a very risky and also not risky at all investment. And
you don't see that ROI, right? Like you don't always see that on this side of heaven. You have no idea the impact that you have made on someone else's life. Even if like in the moment, in that season that God allows you the privilege of being able to, be a mentor of some sort, you may feel like, dude, I just absolutely bombed that. Like, I feel like, 10 years down the road, that person is having a conversation with someone saying, man, Tyler did so much for me. And I'm just really grateful for how he poured it. Like, he probably didn't have the maturity to articulate that to you in that moment, but you have no idea what you're doing. You may not ever hear that until you see Jesus face to face. And
spiritual
have to remember that.
Like we are not growing squash. Squash is like the only thing I've never messed up. Like
it just keeps growing,
like
right?
The one everything else got weeds and I messed it up. But the one time I had a little garden at now my parents' house, like we had some squash. But like we're growing trees, man. Like we're planting like walnut trees that we're not gonna see. Like we're probably not harvesting those trees for the lumber before we pass away. Like that's for the next generation. And coming to terms with that means like also there's some grace that like we don't have to get it right every single time because we're growing trees. But then also we got to have the patience of they're going to be wayward. They're not going to get it. You're going to have to say it and say it and say it. I think about some of the guys that have led like the middle school groups now into like high school. I remember a couple times being like, just hang in there, just hang in there, just hang in there. And they're in their third year now, and they're like, wow, look at, like I said that and they listened to me. Or, hey, they brought this up, and they've never done that. Like, it's always been surface. And so it's cool watching like the little saplings coming out of the woodwork there. But I think that's a good reminder that we're growing trees, not just something that's up in one season.
It's a great analogy. And that equity is being built, right? So the more consistency that you provide, that equity is only getting stronger, and that, so like the trust gets stronger, and your walls begin to break down a little bit, and you're able to say, okay, like this person's not just in it because they're trying to fulfill a role or because they have some type of agenda. Like, they really care for me, and I can trust this person. And you can grow squash pretty quick, but it also dies off really quick. Yeah. That tree, to your point, it takes a long time. There's a lot of work that needs to be done. But how strong is it as it goes? And that only comes with faithfulness. It only comes with having that discipline, having a deliberate mindset to say, hey, we want these roots to deepen. Mm-hmm. And if we cut the tree off before they have the ability to do that, man, we've really lost a great opportunity here. So, man, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for the hard work that you're doing. I appreciate how the Lord has gifted you and wired you and the way that you think through things. For those of you that are listening, Tyler's the guy that I call whenever I have questions about anything strategic, or, hey, have you thought about this? He's a really good thinker and processor. I would say you're an excellent pragmatist. I think you're really, really good at just being able to say, hey, here's what it looks like, and here's where I think we should go based on XYZ. Data driven. I love the way your mind is. And I think when it comes to this, you don't grow without a strategy. And you guys have implemented a strategy within our Next Gen ministry, which is really bleeding into the entirety of our church, that says we want you to serve. We want you to be a spiritual father, spiritual mother. We want brothers and sisters in Christ that are just growing. And again, imperfectly, because welcome to humanity, but we're gonna charge that same hill together. So, Tyler, any closing thoughts, something that you didn't say that you wish you had the opportunity to say before we close?
Yeah, I'll just say, like, man, whether you're a parent, whether you are one of those ones without a biological kid but is serving faithfully, or just wherever you are in the midst of this, like, thanks that we get to partner alongside of this. If it was Tyler trying to spiritual father our 6th through 12th graders, like, it is already imperfect. Like, I just think about how much I would have to stretch to do that. But the reality is we don't have to do that here at Apex, because we have so many people that don't just see the church's mission being like, hey, I'll show up and I'll give so that the pastor does it. There are so many of you who have both invested in me, but then are also investing in that next generation. And so thank you. Like, that sometimes can be so thankless, and sometimes it can feel like, man, where's the fruit? Or like, are they even listening to me? And so, like, your efforts matter in the midst of that. Thank you also to those of you that are doing this as public school football coaches, and as volunteer T-ball coaches, and as, you know, the list can go on and on. Even as you're spiritual fathering in Costco by just not losing your mind over kids running around you, you're doing it. And so my encouragement to you would be, do it with intentionality, recognize all of these things, and let's continue to partner together. And if there are ways we can continue to partner, please, like, let's have those conversations. And because we really do believe the primary discipler is that parent, but also there are people who don't have that luxury, and that's when I love seeing the church step into that. That was I had great parents, and still do. They're not dead, but it's because of some of those spiritual mothers and fathers that alongside of them, that's where they are. And I'm just so grateful that I get to be on the other side of that and get to pour in. But man, our students and our kids are hungry to see authentically lived faith. And so it doesn't have to be perfect, but I think consistency and intentionality matter just so much in the midst of it. So let's grow these orchards, you know, together, and not grow weary when we go through some of those hard seasons, or when it's still not producing fruit. I bought my dad a couple peach trees a couple years ago. I was like, I thought that was a cool Father's Day gift. And for 2 years,
cool gift.
Like I would look and be like, oh, there's like nothing there. And then last year there were some, but they like tasted terrible and they looked bad. Well, this year we took some peaches to Topsail, Heaven on Earth, and ate them. And I was like, this is so cool. But it took 4 years to eat any of that fruit. And so just encourage you, wherever you are, if you are walking in a seed of fruitlessness in that, do not grow weary, because it's not up to us producing that fruit. It's up to the Lord. And that's where I want my investment to go.
Yes and amen, to the praise of his glorious grace. Well said, my brother. Tyler Wama, thank you for joining us today and leading us. And Faith family, thank you for listening. I hope this has been fruitful and edifying for you, and I hope you have an incredible week. God bless.